Couple of other things. Read it out loud, and if it sounds right, it probably is right. If it sounds wrong, it probably is. I don't imagine all of you are grammarians. That's okay. It is with me. You're doing business. You don't get too many points off for really horrible language. I don't mean bad language. I mean bad writing. But you do get some, and so you got to be cautious of being really bad at writing. Run your spell check, your grammar check, obviously. Use active verbs. Get rid of the verb is. Just get rid of all the forms of to be. Is, are, was, were, be, being, and been. Just do a search. Search is. Every sentence that has is in it, change it. Every sentence that has was, were, be, being, been, all of them. Get rid of them. Get rid of every one of them. And change it into active verbs. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And then have somebody else read it. If you're too close to it, you got to have somebody else read it. You will skip words. Your eyes don't work. Your eyes and your mind will skip words because you know what it's supposed to say as opposed to what it says. Also, leave some white space. You get really tired of reading long, big blocks of text. That's why textbooks are so hard to read. They're really long, dense paragraphs in the textbook. If you read a novel, you get all the conversation between the two characters, and the conversation is broken line by line. And a lot of those lines only have one or two words in them. Yes, no, yes, and he smiled, blah blah blah, and that breaks up the page, so you can move faster through the work. So leave white space in your writing. Don't rehash the whole thing in the conclusion. If you're only writing a one-page memo, they're going to remember it all. It's just one page. So don't rehash the whole thing at the end. Just get to the conclusion. The conclusion is not the most important part. We're going to get to that in a second. Try to match the tone of the reader. So what do they expect? We've talked about this before. What have they responded to in the past? That's what you're looking for. And be crystal clear on what you want them to do or what you think they should understand from the report that you're writing, the memo that you're writing. If time allows, sleep on it and then edit again. Examples of good work: find them, steal them, keep them. I have often told my students that their writing is so bad that I keep next to me a good book of excellent writing so I can remind myself what excellent writing is as I end up reading their essays and their papers. I don't mean to be mean to my students, but their writing is pretty bad, and I lose track of what's good and what's bad when I get 20 essays into it. It can be quite challenging. Stay close to the company standard, so make it better. You can make it a little better, make it a little bit yours, but don't go too far astray. Assume that it will show up in court so that everyone will see it. This is true of everything you ever do, online, internet, emails, etc. Just assume it'll show up in court. There was a recent incident that I know of where a friend of mine didn't think their emails would be seen, and there was a lawsuit. And the lawyer, of course, found subpoenaed all the emails, and was nice enough to mention to my friend that there was an email about him saying something bad about his boss to another person. And he mentioned to him, he goes, by the way, your boss has now seen that email because it was in the pile of emails that were subpoenaed for a different project. So just be aware of that. So he's a little unsure of himself now at work because he said some pretty disparaging things of his boss, and now he's aware that his boss found that email, and you think it's private, but it's not. So just assume whatever you write will show up in court. And if you really want action, go pick up the phone or go see them. If you want action, writing doesn't do that. Writing will document things. It does not get people to do stuff very easily. So pick up the phone and say, are you going to do this today? That usually gets a better reaction than sending them a memo. Writing tips, be specific. There were record sales. Well, were, is, are, was, were, be, being, and been. Were is a boring verb, so we should change that. And the second thing is sales record, or there were record sales is a boring sentence. Be more specific. For example, sales were X hundred million, a record. Well, we can also change that and get rid of the were, right? So let's look at the next bullet point. It says be active. People are bored with passive sentences. Or would you prefer that, or passive sentences bore people? Passive sentences bore people is a much better sentence than are people are bored with passive sentences. Is, are, was, were, be, being, and been are the scourge of good writing. Get rid of them. No good author writes with those verbs. Use verbs that move people, that move the story along. So take this example above. Sales were 100 million a record. Well, how could we change that? Well, we could change that a lot of ways. So just change were to a different verb. Sales skyrocketed to $100 million a record. Sales jumped to $100 million a record. Sales rose. Anything but were. Is, are, was, were, be, being, and been are horrible verbs. Get rid of them in your writing. The last bullet point here is my cute little way of saying don't repeat yourself and don't repeat yourself. So guess what I'm not going to do? Repeat myself. Next section is to capture their sentence attention the first sentence. Obviously, this is true in your speeches, but it's also true in your writing. You have to grab them. If you pick up any novel on any bookshelf at any Barnes & Noble or any bookstore you go to, pick up the book and read the first sentence in any of the novels. If that sentence isn't the best grabbing sentence you've ever read, then the author didn't do their job. The more prolific the author, the better their first sentence is. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The first sentence in almost everything grabs your attention right from the beginning. And the same thing in a movie. Every first scene in a James Bond movie starts with some big action scene that is unbelievable. And that's the same thing you should think about in your writing. How am I going to grab their attention from the first sentence? Then you lead from one sentence to another, one paragraph to another. You have some transitions in there, short sentences, small words. Do not try to impress with vocabulary. You're not going to impress people with your vocabulary. You're either going to come off as somebody who's a show-off, which you don't want to do, or you're going to not impress them, which is even worse because you're trying to impress them. So don't do it. Just short, clear words that everyone understands. You can use some industry vocabulary. Because they're all in the same industry. So you can use the vocabulary that is in the industry, but biz speak, using action items on your blah blah plan, whatever the biz speak is of the day, doesn't impress you that you've read the Harvard Business Review or anything. Just be clear about what you're trying to get them. Don't be pretentious. Pretentious doesn't work for anyone.